So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to paint simple watercolor butterflies. After that, I'll paint a bunch and show you how I made them into this framed collection. You can follow this tutorial with any brushes, but I'll list mine in the description. So before I get into this tutorial and explain everything step by step, I want to show you a fast-forwarded overview of all the steps I'm using to paint these butterflies. Step 1. Create a light background wash, roughly in the shape of the wings. Step 2. Paint on the soft portions of the wing pattern, and then smooth them out using the Gaussian blur effect. Step 3. Paint on the harder and more detailed areas of the wing pattern. Step 4. Refine the shape of the wing by erasing the edges to match the reference, and also warping the wing shape if it's necessary. After that, we just have to reflect the wing so it's symmetrical, and then we can finish up the butterfly by painting on a simple body with some antennas. And that's pretty much the whole process. This style of butterfly might be too simple just by itself, but it's perfect for larger arrangements. Next, I'll slow down and show you the process again, using this chlorocroa butterfly as an example. And to start painting, I'm going to first lay down a background wash that's roughly in the shape of both wings. So for the brush, I'm going to use the smooth leaf fade. And for the color, I'm going to choose a kind of light average background color that suits the reference. I think this kind of yellow tone will work for this one. And I'm just going to rough it out like this, trying to do each wing basically in one brush stroke, one continuous stroke. And then to fill it out, I'm just going to go side to side. Then I'll do the same thing for the bottom wing. And once that's finished, I'm going to grab the arrow tool, set to warp, and I'm going to bend this background wash so it more closely matches the reference photo. Next, I'm going to move on and start adding the patterns, and those are going to be on their own blank layer. And when I look at the reference photo, I have to kind of divide the patterns into two different types. So on most butterflies, there are what I call soft patterns and hard patterns. So down here, these kind of clearly defined circles and black lines, those are hard patterns. But this kind of soft transition from orange to black to turquoise, that's a soft pattern. And I usually like to start by painting the soft patterns first. So for that, I'm going to use the smooth leaf fade brush, and I'm just going to roughly lay down all those colors, just roughly in the right position. And I'm not worrying about blending because I'll do that when this is finished. And once those colors are laid out there, I'm going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and then I'm going to blend them all together using this. And when you use the Gaussian blur to do this, it creates a very smooth transition, but usually on butterfly wings, the transitions are a little bit grainy. So if you want to get that effect, I have a little bit of a trick. Just go to the adjustments, go to liquify, set it to crystals. You can copy my settings here, and this just controls the size. I'm going to set this to around 40 or 50%, and I'm just going to scribble kind of really quickly on all those kind of transition areas, and you can see it makes it look a little bit grainy and more interesting. And once the soft patterns are finished, we can move on and do the hard patterns, and I recommend doing those on their own layer as well. For the brush, I'm going to continue using the smooth leaf fade, and I'm just going to roughly add those in. And that's how I'd handle the kind of bolder patterns. Now for the lines and vein kind of details on the wing, I recommend doing that a little bit differently. So for that, I'll make another blank layer. I'll continue using some kind of dark tone, but I'm going to change my brush over to the drawing tab here, and I'm going to use the little pine brush. And I'm just going to use this to rough out the veins. And the reason I did the veins on their own layer is because I want to adjust the transparency. So first, I'm going to set the transparency mode to color burn. Then I'm going to lower the opacity to 0. And I'm going to slowly raise it back up just until those lines are barely visible. There we go. And once I'm happy with how it looks, I'll merge everything so far together onto one layer. And up until now, we've been going pretty far beyond our original background wash. So at this point, I'd like to cut it back. So for that, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, I'm going to set it to the fine liner pen, and I'm going to increase the stabilization in Procreate pretty high. I think I'll set it to around 50%. And this just makes the brush kind of move in a very smooth, kind of syrupy way. And I'm going to use this to cut everything back so the outline of the wing more closely matches the reference photo. And there we go. At this point the wing is finished and we can move on and start assembling the whole butterfly. So for that, the first thing I'm going to do is move the wing off to the side. Then I'll create a duplicate of it. Then I can use the arrow tool again to kind of reflect the wing. And I'm going to position it not exactly touching the other one. I'm going to leave a little bit of a space between them. Then after that, I can merge them together onto one layer. And now for the body of the butterfly, I usually try to make it as simple as possible. I'm just going to glance at the reference photo and see the overall colors. It looks like a dark brown body, a little bit of white on the head, and then 2 black eyes. So I'll do my best to make that here. I recommend making the body on its own blank layer. And for the brush, I'm going to go back to the watercolor kit and do it all with the fine liner pen. And I'll just do my best to rough it out. And for the head, usually I just do a little bump in the middle and then 2 eyes. But this one has some white details that I think are important, so I'll try to add those in as well. And since the body is on its own layer, sometimes I'll use the arrow tool to kind of scale it and position it a little bit better. And now for the antennas, and those are super simple, but I have a little bit of a trick I use. First, I'll make another blank layer above everything. I'll choose some kind of dark tone, and I like them to look a little bit scratchy, so I'm going to go back to the drawing tab and use the little pine brush, and I'll just make one antenna. And then usually on the tip of the antenna, I'll go over it a few times to make it a little bit darker and bolder. Then I'll just duplicate that antenna layer, and then I'll reflect it over, just like I did for the wing. And then after that, I'll merge everything back together onto one layer. And at this point, the butterfly could be done, but there's one more step I often do at the end here, and it's called color grading. So as long as the whole butterfly is merged together onto one layer, you can select that layer, go to your adjustments, and then use color balance to mess with the kind of shade and tone of the shadows, highlights, and midtones. And I recommend just playing with this, randomly adjusting some of the colors, and often I find an interesting combination that I wouldn't usually come up with naturally, but it looks really good. And in some cases, you might want to modify one color in particular. So for example, I want to shift this orange area a little bit towards yellow. So what I can do is use the selection tool set to freehand, and I'll just manually select that area. Then I'll feather out that selection quite a bit. And this time I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can adjust the hue like this. And there we go, this butterfly is finished, and here's what it looks like just by itself. Next, I'm going to go through the process one more time. After that, I'll show you all the butterflies I painted and how I printed and displayed them. So just like before, I've got my reference photo off to the side, and I'm going to use that same smooth leaf fade brush to rough out the overall shape of the wings. Then I can use the selection tool set to warp to sort of refine the shape here and make it a little bit better. Now this butterfly also has a combination of soft patterns and hard patterns. I think the soft pattern is pretty simple. It's just this blue tone fading into black. So I'm going to make a new layer and do my best to add this in. And once those colors are laid down, I'm going to use the Gaussian blur to soften everything up. And once the soft patterns are finished, I'm going to make another layer and move on and do the hard patterns. After that, I'll make another blank layer, and I'm going to use the little pine brush to do the vein details. After that, I'll set the transparency mode of the veins to color burn. I'll set the opacity quite a bit lighter, and then I'll merge everything so far onto one layer. And with the overall color and pattern of the wing finished, I'm going to grab the eraser brush. I'll set my stabilization super high, and then I'll cut it out so it matches the reference photo. And once the wing is finished, I can turn off my reference photo just for now. Then I'll duplicate my wing, grab the arrow tool, flip it, and then move it into position. There we go. Then I'll merge both wings together onto one layer. And for the body, I'll make a blank layer above the wings, and I'm just going to rough that out using the fine liner pen. After that, I'll make another new layer for the antenna, and I'm going to change my brush back to the little pine, and I'll just draw one antenna and then mirror it over. After that, I'll merge all the layers for the body together onto one, and because I think it ended up a little bit too small, I'm going to scale it up and reposition it. And just like before, I'll finish up this butterfly by merging everything together onto one layer, and then I'll play with the colors using the color balance tool. And there we go. Hopefully that's a pretty good overview of the process. I've already gone ahead and painted 9 more butterflies using this method and roughly planned out the arrangement. For printing, I'm just using a regular cheap Canon Pixma printer, and for the paper, I'm using Fujifilm Crystal. I wish I could find some good matte photo paper, but the satin effect that this particular one has looks pretty good. And once I printed each butterfly out, I just went through and cut them all out using a craft knife. I left a little bit of a gap on the edges, and I had to be extra careful around the antenna. Before I mounted all the butterflies permanently, I did make sure to place them loosely in the frame and kind of shuffle them around a little bit to make sure the arrangement was balanced. Once I was happy with how everything looked, I stuck them all down perfectly using foam tape, and usually I used 4 pieces of foam tape, one on the end of each wing. And here's the final result. Just like with the birds in last week's video, I'm really surprised at how well all these look together in a collage like this. I think next time I will do something a little bit different. I felt like it was difficult to organize the butterflies because I made them randomly. I really like the sort of scientific feeling I get from putting them in frames like this, and organizing them by color or some kind of morphology or something does kind of enhance that effect, and I think it would look really good. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. If you think I've earned it, please give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next video.